project we're working on was the Grampians Rail Trail, which is an 11-kilometre section which goes part way from Stawell to Halls Gap. But firstly, obviously scoped out what the cost and the things we needed to do for the grant, and what it does, it put it above the $5,000 figure, which is a difficult number because most grants, community grants and things, usually will have $5,000 and don't require any in-kind. So that was the first thing. It actually put us out of most of the community-based grants, and it puts you into that gap, like anything above $5,000. And I mean, this grant came in at a bit over $9,000. There is an expectation of grants that you have in kind, and usually up to 50% of the value of the grant. Now that became problematic because a lot of the funding is required to actually get all the digital links so that it can go onto the ESTA system, the Emergency Services System, and so there's all that technical stuff, and that makes up a large portion of the funding. What's remaining was posts and the actual plates which go onto the post. So even with our funding, most generously, we couldn't. I think we only reached less than 20% of in-kind for the actual grant itself. There was just nothing else to do. I mean, we would install the post, we would make the various bits and pieces, and we would project manage it and all that. And it came to less than 20%. So that presents quite a problem because, like I say, grants would expect that you have 50% in kind. So that was the first thing. So we knew what sort of grant we'd probably be looking at. Then the next thing I did was actually search for what would be where you would expect this sort of project to fit into a grant. And so emergency services, you'd think it might fit into that. No, it doesn't. Most of the emergency services stuff it has a totally different brief altogether. So it doesn't fit into that. Then you would look at say, sports, because this is to do with a rail trail, so therefore it's a recreational activity-based project. And you would think that would probably fall into that, but it doesn't. And most of those grants would provide things such as if your clubhouse was flooded or your equipment got burnt and that sort of thing. So the sport and recreation stuff doesn't fit either. And it took me a little while to think about this because at the moment, most of the emergency marker signed setup is done by local government or by government instrumentalities. And we're a community group. And so I don't know how many community groups actually have actually set this up, but we really needed to do it. We're running and managing a rail trail for the community, for the public, and there's an expectation that we're actually providing a safe experience for people. And so this became quite important. So what did we have? We had a grant amount where you needed to have a lot of in-kind. We didn't have, and most of the grants out there didn't have it. So you're either looking to a philanthropic fund or another fund. And the one we chose was the Foundation for Regional and Rural Renewal, FRRR fund. And they did have a category in there which was about community, and that seemed to be a reasonable fit. We didn't really explore other philanthropic because most of those, again, don't fit. You know, most of them are looking for other on-ground outcomes or, you know, it's community development, crime alleviation, kids at risk, that sort of thing. Whereas what we wanted was a project to put the emergency markers in to make our bit of infrastructure safe. So that's why we ended up with the FRRR. From there, I put together the grant application, and I've done a lot of grants, so I sort of have a reasonable idea about how to present the information. But one of the key things that we actually had is we actually had a history of an accident that actually happened on our rail trail years ago. And so we could actually quote that, and we had a letter from one of the people that was at the incident. And so we actually had a real-time example of why we needed these emergency markers. And so that was helpful. But in reflection of that, you could easily pick up another example. It wouldn't necessarily have to be on the project you're working on, but on another project that has similarities. And what came out of this accident was that our rail trail is off-road and there's very few road crossings. And even though I've now put names on all the roads, if you're riding, how much notice do you take? You know, what was the name of that road? Cod something, you know, and you'd be stuffed and you wouldn't know actually where you are. And the experience I had was I rang up emergency services and they said, "Where are you?" I said, "We're in a creek." And even once I worked out where they were, it took an inordinate amount of time to actually get an ambulance there and the SES to carry the person out. Having a real life example, I think, is really important because it actually shows why the emergency markers are needed. There's also good material, videos and whatever from the company, which I added in there as well, just to make sure that whoever was seeing the grant would have a full understanding about emergency markers. So that was probably the second thing. The third thing was to actually point out that there was no place that this grant fits into. And I think it was worthwhile saying that because it's not as if you could get a grant from anywhere. Together with the nature of the project, that's why our in-kind wasn't as high as would be expected. But still, it's a worthwhile project. Those are the sort of steps we used. Then the rest of the grant was just talking about the expectation that the public would have. If someone is riding on their rail trail and they have an accident, they would expect there's some sort of processes that would facilitate them getting assistance as soon as possible. Now, people using public infrastructure assume that anyway. So you really do need to have it, and you need to have it in a format such as these emergency markers that is easy for people to do. Having road signs where I had the road signs, guess what? It probably is not going to make a difference, you know, because you have to be able to remember it. Looking on your Google Maps or whatever will not help either, because not only is your location somewhat hard to find, particularly if it's off-road, you look like you're in the middle of a paddock. It's getting access to that point that becomes the next critical thing. If we've got an 11-kilometre rail trail, and there's locations there that would take a 3-kilometre detour to get to that person. Now, without that information, emergency services are going to be really, really stuck to get there in time. The other thing which followed from that, there is a human dimension to this. The people in emergency services really try to do the best they can, and they're pretty hard on themselves when things don't go right. And one of the things that upsets them, particularly if there's a bad outcome, is that the what if, you know, if we got there 20 minutes earlier, it could have made all the difference. And being in the CFA myself, I know that feeling. I've seen that, you know, even though you do everything you possibly can, that the what if is a big problem. And the big what if is getting to people in time. So that was the other point which I was actually making, because it does affect your community. It certainly affects your fire brigade, your ambulance, your SES, your police. All those people have a human cost for when things go wrong. And so to have the emergency markers there means that eliminates that from the whole system. So it certainly will help. Beyond that, I guess it was really just making the point that we're a community-run rail trail, which is unique, and we carry the public liability, the insurance costs, and the infrastructure costs, plus all the other management costs. And we really do need to be seen to be doing everything possible to make it safe for the community. This became a very necessary item. And fortunately, we got the grant. Do the research, find examples, look to what grants are available. You may have to explain why you can't provide a lot of in-kind. Work with Rapid Maps to actually help you get it right.